a.m. Are we? That was my next question. Was if we were recording. Everyone's on it this morning. I think everyone drank some coffee. So it is Thursday, December 5th. It is 8:30 a.m. This is the Oregon Veterinary Medical Examining Board public session meeting. We'll quickly do our call to order and then we'll do roll call. And then we're going to jump down to a topic in our public session, and then we'll move over to executive session this morning after the one public topic. And then tomorrow we will reconvene in our public session as well, just to give everybody a heads up. So we'll go ahead and call roll call right now. So Director Peter Burns.
Here, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Licensing Administrator Brooke Walker.
Here.
Thank you. Inspector Ingrid Nye.
Here.
Thank you. Investigator Janine Holland.
I'm here.
Thank you. Investigator Bertina Grajo. You may not have caught.
I'm here.
Oh, you're really here. You're echoey here. Senior Assistant Attorney General Joanna Tucker Davis.
Here.
Board members, Dr. Allison Lamb, I'm here. Dr. Brett Hamilton.
Here.
Miss Natalie Mayer Williamson.
Here.
Miss Karen Pate.
Here.
Dr. Katie Wallace. Dr. Wallace, I don't think we captured you're here.
I'm here.
Thank you. Dr. Max Rinaldi.
I'm here.
Thank you. And absent today is Dr. Reagan Borzak and Mr. Brian Wadika. We do have some public members in the room. I'm just going to have you say hello. So Christina Keefe with Portland Veterinary Medical Association.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Sharice Roth with Mars Pet Healthcare.
Hi, how's it going?
Great. Thank you. Good morning. Glenn Kolb with Oregon Veterinary Medical Association.
Yep. Good morning.
Thank you, Glenn. Do you know how hard it is for me not to say examining board every time I say your title? So thank you for bearing with me.
It's okay. It's commonly confused.
No worries. Thanks for supporting us. And Dr. Beth Bennett.
Good morning. I'm here.
Thank you. So I think I called everybody. Is there anybody else that I'm missing in the room? Anybody? If I did, please unmute.
I don't know if you read the call to order, but I think we need to read through that.
Okay, thank you. I will go ahead and jump back to call to order. So this is the public session. It's scheduled to start at 8:30 and will continue to the end of business. Executive session, which is closed to the public, will follow, continuing until the end of business. The board expects to come out of executive session and into public session for the purpose of voting on the cases discussed during executive session and other applicable board business. Thank you for keeping me on track, Director Burns. So we have the honor and privilege today to have Dr. Beth Bennett with us. And I had the opportunity to go to a national board meeting with American Association of Veterinary State Boards in September, and I heard her speak. And this was a great topic and just so timely. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to bring Dr. Bennett to one of our board member meetings to explain a little bit more about a veterinary team survey that they did. So if anyone's not familiar with the American Association of Veterinary State Boards, it's a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. They are out of Overland Park, Kansas, and they have 63 jurisdictions of licensing boards, including the United States, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and 10 Canadian provinces that are all in their organization. And the mission was to support and advance the regulation of veterinary medicine. And Dr. Beth Bennett joined them. You probably know the date better than I do, Beth, and I have your bio here, but I'll let her ring that in when she starts talking. But she is a former small animal practitioner in small animal medicine. And she worked for the U.S. Department of the State for 3 years until joining the American Association of Veterinary State Boards as their chief veterinary officer. She is also on the committee staff for the AAVSB's regulatory policy committee. So I'll turn it over to you, Beth, and thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you making the time to join us.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to do this. The outreach is one of my jobs. So I was hired 2 years ago, and one of my first tasks was to start organizing this survey. So this was a long-term project. We did finish it with a white paper. So I'm going to, in a couple screens, I'm going to show a QR code. For those of you that haven't yet gotten a chance to read the white paper, you can have your phones ready. You can stop the QR code or go to our website to get it. So again, thank you so much for changing your schedule to allow me to be here. I'm actually flying tomorrow to give this exact same presentation to the American Veterinary Consultants. So this is a very timely topic. You'll see that there's a couple slides in there that are already, let's say, obsolete. So let's dig in there. It looks like it's not letting me share my screen. Could I get permission?
Yeah, let me try this here.
All right, I think it's letting me now.
Did I do it?
Okay.
Perfect.
Thumbs up? Okay. So I'm going to go through this a little bit faster than I did at the meeting, just because I know your time is limited. So please stop me if you have questions. I'm happy to dig into more detail. So this is the exact same presentation that I gave at our annual meeting and conference. If you get a chance to go next year, please consider going. Everybody has great reviews, and it's generally a well-received educational event. So again, this is that aforementioned QR code. We're going to go through a quick survey recap and takeaways. We're going to talk about our decision regarding the mid-level practitioner. We're going to go do a deep dive into the results and then talk about our next steps. So we designed this survey because there's been a lot of, or let me go back to the QR code for those. So we did this survey because there's been a lot of conversations in the veterinary industry about this mid-level practitioner, but there's no consensus on what this practitioner could do or even what supervision level that practitioner could have. So we did this survey just to get a kind of a feeling for how the veterinary community in North America feels about it and what tasks they could potentially do. So we assembled a bunch of really smart people in a room for 2 days, and we created this survey. The really smart people were from the regulatory boards, private practice, academia, state, government, professional associations, and a neutral third-party psychometrician. It's the same psychometrician that administers our VT&E, so we have a good relationship with them. The veterinarians that we had there represented small animal, large animal, equine, food production. We had veterinary technicians there. So we really tried to have a robust representation of the veterinary community. We did define some roles to kind of set a level playing field. As you guys probably know, veterinary technician has different definitions depending on the state that you're in. So we defined it, just to do a level playing field, we defined it as someone who has completed an accredited veterinary technician program and has passed the VT&E. And then we created this new person. We came up with this term called the advanced animal healthcare provider, simply only because mid-level practitioner carries a lot of bias. So we wanted to remove, the goal of this survey was to remove as much bias as possible. And in fact, we probably spent a couple hours just trying to remove bias. So one of the ways we did that is we came up with this new term just to kind of remove any negative or positive bias that may be associated with the mid-level practitioner. We define them as having additional training, expertise, and experience above a veterinary technician. And we asked the survey takers to presume a credentialing program and exam. So just to say, this isn't some guy coming off the street saying they're a mid-level practitioner. There's a regulatory process behind this role. And for the veterinarian, we stated that the veterinarian would be in charge of establishing a VCPR. They would be in charge of delegating tasks, and they would supervise team members. So the reason we did this was previous other models of this mid-level practitioner suggest that that person could operate independently of a veterinarian. What we wanted to do was see people's opinions about this person, potentially if they work underneath a veterinarian. So the veterinarian still is in charge of delegating and determining who can do these tasks. It is a little bit more conservative, but we felt like that was the most appropriate path to take. So we asked two different kinds of questions. We asked broad policy questions, such as, is there a need for a mid-level practitioner, or what we call the AAHP? And if so, what background did they come from? Is there a need for a change in delegation? And then what can be done to address the workforce shortage? And then we had a list of 108 tasks. It was very detailed. People told me that it was a lot, and I said, well, it wasn't meant to be easy. So we asked questions based under all species, food production, equine and companion animal. I admit that we left out the rabbits and the ferrets and the birds, but we, again, it was already long enough. So we had to keep it at the major species groups. We had both veterinary technician tasks and asked if somebody could perform them at a lower supervision level. And then we had some traditional veterinarian tasks to see if somebody with more education, training, and expertise could be able to do them. We also had two different levels of supervision. In our current model regulations for veterinary technicians, we have indirect, direct, and immediate. In this survey, for the purpose of, again, keeping it as simple as possible, we had direct and indirect. Indirect means that the supervising veterinarian has given instructions but does not need to be on the premises, but they do need to be reachable. So they're not on Everest. They can be, you could call them on the phone. Direct supervision is the veterinarian is on the premises and is readily available on the premises. So that's the two different levels of supervision. Main takeaways. So there are opposing takeaways. So the policy questions had mixed support for the mid-level practitioner, but then when we dug deeper into the task questions, and that's what we did over the last year, and it did take a year to do, the task questions did not actually support this mid-level practitioner idea, and I'm going to go into this further. Most of the respondents were in favor of more delegation to veterinary technicians. But then when you look at some of the popular veterinary technician tasks, so the tasks that a lot of people said vet techs could do, they're not in a lot of the practice acts currently, including ours, and I'm going to go into some examples. So there was a high level of agreement for DVM only, which is one of the categories. So we said, who could do this task under a minimum level? What is the minimum level of education, training, and supervision needed to complete a task? And we always had one option, which was DVM only, meaning only the veterinarian should do it. It should not be delegated. For these tasks that you see on the screen, there's a high level of agreement, very high level of agreement for the DVM to do these tasks. And this level of agreement was across the board when you filtered out those that were in favor of a mid-level practitioner and those that were not. And it was a high level of agreement between veterinary technicians and veterinary respondents. So, for example, a lot of people said 93% of people felt like a feline spay should only be done by a veterinarian, and that there was a high level agreement across the board for that. You're going to see this throughout, something like this throughout the presentation, and this is in the appendix of the white paper. So we list every single technician or every single task and have a breakdown similar to the one you see on the screen. So another way to look at the task is when there wasn't such a high level of agreement, you can look at it with the mind of majority versus plurality. So majority, as a reminder, is over 50%. Plurality occurs when the vote is split between more than two options. So plurality means that you have the highest vote, but it might not be over 50%. And that is very important to keep in mind when you look at these tasks, because what we're doing is we're essentially splitting the vote. So DVM only, that's clear. But when we look at the veterinary technician tasks or the AAHP tasks, we're splitting the vote between indirect and direct. So when you look at these tasks and you're thinking about who could potentially perform these tasks, just keep that in mind that that vote is split. And another way to look at it, another way to look at it is this vote is split further between DVMs and non-DVMs. So for example, for this one, perform initial evaluation of superficial skin lesions, we have 6 options if you include the unsure, but we have 5 options. 67% of the participants did not think that a DVM degree was necessary for this task. So that's one way to look at this. Another way to look at it is 52% of participants, so a slight majority, thought that a veterinary technician could do it. So when you look at the tasks in the appendix, and this is part of what took a whole year for us to do. When you look at the appendix, just look at it with that mindset. It's just another way to, it's not just black and white. 32% thought that a DVM was necessary. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So why did we decide not to pursue actions toward a mid-level practitioner? Now, this is the part that's already, that may already be obsolete. So I presented this in the end of September. In November, the public of Colorado voted for a veterinary professional associate, which is essentially mid-level practitioner. We decided not to preemptively pursue actions towards the mid-level practitioner, but I do want to assure you that AAVSB's mission is to support our member boards. Given that, we have reached out to Colorado to see how we can help and support them during this. And if this happens to anybody else, we will do the same thing. We will reach out to the boards to ask how we can offer our support, expertise, and resources if this happens to anybody else. As you know, it's not always the choice of the board. So we are here to support the boards however they need. So possible AAVSB actions would include writing statutory regulatory language with my committee, the Regulatory Policy Committee. And then we also discussed creating and administering a certification exam similar to the VTNE. So why did we decide not to move forward preemptively? So there were mixed opinions on the need for a mid-level practitioner. This was in the policy questions. It's a third, essentially. But when you divide it between respondents that are veterinary technicians and veterinarians, almost half of veterinarians said that they did not think there was a need. And these veterinarians would be the delegators. So if half of them say that they wouldn't, and only a quarter said that there is a need for a mid-level practitioner, who would delegate? There's not a lot of people that would be opting for this position. And then when you dig in deeper to the tasks, AAHP support didn't stand up in the task delegation process. So those 108 tasks, when you asked respondents to assign a task to either DVM or veterinary technician or mid-level practitioner, people wanted to go with either DVM or veterinary technician. So if you look at the responses among all respondents, whether or not they're supportive of a mid-level practitioner or if they were, the highest level for a mid-level practitioner to complete these tasks never exceeded 18%. And then if you filter it down to look at those who said, yes, there is a need for a mid-level practitioner, for no task did that practitioner receive the highest support for delegation. So even if a person said that there was a need for a mid-level practitioner, they were more likely to say either a veterinary technician or a veterinarian should do a task than a mid-level practitioner. So what does that look like? So this is the shelter dogs, cat, and cat neuters. Just shelter cat neuter, who doesn't like a good cat neuter? That's kind of different from everybody else. But for shelter cat and shelter dog, even amongst AHP supporters, as I said before, there was still large support for the DVM to do these tasks. There was a little bit more support with shelter cat neuters for the AAHP to do it, but even so, 43% of the AHP supporters felt like a veterinary technician could do the task. So it's kind of what would be gained here. If people still think a veterinary technician could potentially do it, then there's no need for a mid-level practitioner. There were some tasks that was with AAHP supporters, it was more of an even distribution. So maybe more of a third. That includes feline urinary unblockage, epidermal cryosurgery, perform wellness exam, and maintain a VCPR. But even so, if you look at the numbers, so 38% of all respondents thought that a veterinary technician could do a feline urinary unblockage procedure. If you look at the mid-level practitioner supporters, only 23% of them thought that a mid-level practitioner could do that. Majority of them wanted a veterinary technician to do it. So again, what would be gained here by going and creating this new position? So the same is with rectal palpation. So for cows. So again, 40% of all respondents felt like a veterinary technician could complete this task under some sort of supervision. And only 27% of mid-level practitioners thought that a AHP was needed. And I see a hand up for Dr. Wallace.
So I'm just curious on the board of people who did this survey, if there was any ranchers or included, because I work in rural America and ranchers are stealing this job from me every day because they can't find somebody in the veterinary world to do it. So I feel like this is strongly swayed by veterinary professionals having an opinion here and not actually stakeholders, because I know what's happening in my life.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. We did not send out this survey to the public. This was just veterinarians and veterinary technicians. So as I said, possible AAVSB actions would be to write model statutory regulatory language or create and administer an exam. So with the regulatory language, the regulatory policy committee can still do that if desired or asked for by the members or the board of directors. We are standing by and ready to do it. In September, we were saying now is not the time to do this exam. So this is something I might skip over a little bit more just to go into why we wouldn't do the exam. So there's when you're looking for a legally dispensable certification exam, there's certain conditions that are ideally met. We have all of the ones in green, but the ones in orange are still not met yet. So, a job analysis, you can't do it if there's no position. The survey doesn't indicate good market support or consensus. At that time of this presentation, the appropriate laws and rules were not in place. Things have changed. There's no accredited programs yet. And there's no professionals currently, again, performing this specific set of tasks. So this is ideal. We live in the real world. So again, we've reached out to Colorado to see if they need any help. We're waiting to hear back from them. And I think they're still determining what they need. So what we're going to do, what AAVSB opted to do, is focus on veterinary technician scope of practice. And we're not alone. So this is just two examples of different states that over the past year have kind of taken a good look at their veterinary technician scope of practice. So Iowa actually moved rectal palpation to indirect supervision for veterinary technicians, specifically so that they could continue to provide the support. And I sat in on, Dr. Wallace, per your question, I actually sat in on a meeting, the initial meeting to talk about this, and the Ranchers Association was a large voice in asking them to allow this. So in Nebraska actually sent out their own survey to both veterinarians and veterinary technicians within their jurisdiction. They said they didn't receive a large response back, but these are just some questions they asked. What other tasks could be delegated? our text being used to the fullest extent, just to kind of get a feel for what is being used in that jurisdiction. So this is a slide just to remind me to say, surveys are just opinions, they're not facts. And, what we did was we asked for opinions over the entirety of North America. What you have to do in Oregon is what is best for Oregon. So for example, survey results are one thing, but what's best for your public, it's up to you to determine that. What's best for Oregon public may not be what's best for Maine public or Florida public. So for example, for implanting bovine embryos, 52%, so the majority felt like a veterinarian should be the one to do bovine embryo implantation. And yet I know of several jurisdictions that are looking at embryo transfer technicians to allow that service to the public. And again, gosh, controversy, equine dentistry. So, again, what best addresses public need? West Virginia recently held a working group on how to provide equine dental care for the public. And there was, again, a lot of public members there, saying this is something that's needed, that we don't have enough veterinarians to provide. So your job as the board, and I don't envy you at all, is to consider how to increase care, but make sure that care is competent. So the majority, in one of our policy questions, the majority of respondents said that veterinary technicians can take on more duties. So 77% thought that the scope of practice for vet techs should be expanded to those that have additional training and credentialing. And even 62% said, don't wait for that. We can increase it now for all credentialed veterinary technicians. And then a majority said that there should be a change in task delegation when we asked it in a Likert scale. So this is something that's interesting. There's general agreement for veterinary technicians to perform many tasks. These are tasks that are on the CVTEA task list, or skill list. So when you go to veterinary technician, this is on the essential skill list. And yet I know, because I've read every Practice Act, I know for a fact that some of this is not on every single Practice Act for veterinary technicians to be allowed to do. So this is something they learn in school. Maybe we could, it's something to consider whether or not veterinary technicians could be allowed to do it per your Practice Act. And I apologize, whenever I do these, I generally try to reread the Practice Act for each jurisdiction, and I did not get a chance to read Oregon. So you may already allow this, but something to think about. One thing that was interesting was survey respondents were generally comfortable with veterinary technicians dispensing anti-parasite treatment under a veterinary protocol. 65% thought that veterinary technicians could do it. But when we asked the same question for basic illnesses, only 41% thought that a veterinary technician could do it. So there is nuance in these questions. And I urge you to kind of go through the appendix and see what you got there. So what I did, I put on my nerd hat and I looked at our model documents and I compared it based to the survey findings to see how AAVSB model documents stacks up. So if a veterinarian was asking, so I'm the hypothetical board, a veterinarian, you sent me an email saying, hey, can a veterinary technician do this? I looked at our documents to see what I could answer for them. So if they ask if a fine needle aspirate is allowable, it's on the CVTEA skill list. So veterinary technicians are taught how to do fine needle aspirates. And the majority of survey respondents felt that a veterinary technician could perform them. But when I look at the AAVSB model language, we don't specifically mention fine needle aspirate. We do say they can do a fluid aspiration from a body cavity or organ. Sorry for the typo. But I don't know if I was the board, I don't know if I would assume that that would include a fine needle aspirate. It might be something that might be in a little bit of a gray area. And again, so another thing, in our model regulations, we specifically state that a veterinary technician can suture, staple, or glue a surgical incision. but we don't say anything about a laceration repair. So if somebody asked me if a veterinary technician could do it, I don't know if I would be able to say yes. The assumption may be that only a veterinarian can do it. So these are the things that we're talking about with Regulatory Policy Committee. It's up for our veterinary technician scope of practice model regs is up for the 5-year review. So this is a question that we're asking ourselves every time we meet to see about how we can reword the language to remove some of this ambiguity. We also are talking about ambiguity between some of these words. So what is the difference between evaluating and diagnosing? What's the difference between prescribing and dispensing? And what's a surgery versus a procedure? So we're kind of working through these, and that will be incorporated into the next version of the model regs. And this is just a reminder, the FDA did put out 2024 guidance on prescribing. So if you haven't gotten a chance to take a look at it, just take a look. Again, this is our next step. So RPC is utilizing resources from legal. We have veterinary technicians, veterinarians, board members, and regulators on the RPC. We're looking at recent best practices set out from other associations, and we're using the survey results to kind of reevaluate our veterinary technician scope of practice. And then what we're going to do, and this is per a newly approved policy for the board of directors, the AAVSB board of directors. So the RPC will revise the model regulations. It's going to go out for 120-day member board commentary. So you all can take a look at what we have. You could tell us if we're on the right track or if we should consider something else. And then there's the final document that's going to get put out again. And then the member boards will be able to review it for another 120-day review. And then the AAVSB delegates will vote at it at the 2026 annual meeting and conference, hopefully. So that's what you can expect. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett. We really appreciate that comprehensive overview. I know that was not easy statistics by any means to look at. I will just open it up to the board members and see if anybody has any quick questions for Dr. Bennett. Brooke, I think you might be unmuted, just a heads up. Dr. Rinaldi?
I just had a question. I didn't see any mention of VTS, and it's possible I missed a bit. But I was kind of curious what role that plays in this discussion, or thoughts that you guys have given to that.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So we did have 2 VTS veterinary technicians on the survey board. We talked about it, but per their recommendation, they actually said not to make that distinction. I think the assumption would be when we asked that question about if you could expand the scope of practice for those with additional training and expertise. VTS is veterinary technician specialist. So it's voluntary credentialing run by NAFTA. Usually it involves certain number of experience and then possibly an exam. The reason why we didn't specifically call them out is because the VTS process is not uniform. And we determined that we would leave that question open to interpretation for each board. What we're doing, the conversations that we're having with Regulatory Policy Committee is we're wondering if maybe we should keep the supervision, the required minimum supervision level on the low side and leave it up to the veterinarian to determine if that individual has the experience and education and credentialing to perform a task under a lower supervision. So if that makes sense. So, it's on a case-by-case basis for the veterinarian to determine whether or not that person through having a VTS or through 30 years of experience would be able to complete a task as the primary supervision and delegator of tasks.
Okay, no, I appreciate it. It's
Yeah.
something that I've thought about in in the context of mid-level practitioners, because we have a relatively small body of people that are, most of them I've met are far smarter than I am, who it kind of seems like they're getting overlooked in this conversation generally, but so I appreciate you answering the question. Thank you.
Of course.
I think we have a minute or two more. Any other board members?
I had a question about the thoughts on how we increase the number of vet techs if we want to give them more jobs. I mean, I've been at this, the board knows, for like 19 years, and I've hired one certified tech. They don't fill all the holes. So how are we gonna increase that number of people?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know if that answer. I like to think that allowing them to work at the top of their license and financially compensating them for that work is a way to retain technicians. But that question was outside the scope of this survey. I have my own further ideas from that, but it's definitely a multifactorial issue. I'm hopeful that there's been a lot more focus on veterinary technicians in the last couple of years, and AAVSB is working towards promoting veterinary technician credentialing. So I'm hoping that we're going to get more, but it is a problem. I agree.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Bennett. We really appreciate you taking time out of your morning. This is a really nice good morning and bringing everybody kind of to attention for the rest of our board meeting 2-day event. And I just can't thank you enough for making time for us today.
Oh, I'm very grateful for the invitation. It's really good to see you guys.
It's great to see you too.
Thanks.
All right. Well, with that, I believe, Pete, unless there's anything else we need to cover this morning in the public session, we're moving over to executive session, and then we'll be back in public session tomorrow. Is that correct?
That's correct. And board members, you should have the link to the executive session email in the last email I sent you.
Great. So it is Thursday, December 5th at 9:07 a.m. And this is the Oregon Veterinary Medical Examining Board. We'll now go into executive session pursuant ORS 192.6602 capital L, ORS 192.6602 little f, ORS 192.6602 little h, and 676.1751 concerning discipline, litigation, and exempt public records. Representatives of the news media and designated staff will be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience will be asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions will be made in executive session, and at the end of the executive session, we'll return to open session and welcome the audience back into the room. I'll see all the board members and staff and Joanna in the executive session. Thank you for joining us.